Welcome back to PodPaca. Today we have another special guest on. Our guest today, he is a retired editor and he is a author in the area. He is from Iola, which is, for those who don't know, in between Point and New London and central Wisconsin. So please welcome to PodPaca, Mike Jacquart. How are you today?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on today, Joe.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you about the newest book that you have had released. You released this back in December of 2022, correct?
Right.
And this book is quite a bit different than the other two books that you have wrote. Your first two books were Packer related books, but this one was about mental wellness. It's called Climbing Out of Darkness, a personal journey into mental wellness. What made you want to write a book about your mental wellness? It's more of a personal story compared to the Packer books. What made you more comfortable telling people your story about mental wellness?
It's a topic near and dear to my heart because it's something I've experienced depression on and off through quite a bit of my life. I'm on a couple of medications for it. I'm also in a support group that's been enormously helpful. Good friend of mine that was best man at our wedding took his life about 15 years ago. So it's something that I understand the seriousness of it. And Joe, a lot of people do not realize how common it is. They're roughly one out of, I believe it's four Americans experience some sort of a mental health, I like to call it challenge, because we all
Hmm.
have challenges in life, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but unfortunate thing is, you see somebody in a wheelchair. Well, it's obvious, they can't walk or walk very poorly. You see somebody with a dog and a cane, and it's pretty obvious they're blind. I like to call these invisible barriers because there's things going on that the average person just, is not aware of. So I just wanted to heighten my awareness. I had done a little editing for a fellow writer, young lady, who wrote one about her experiences overcoming sexual abuse and some things like that, and some of the trauma it had. And I was told a book like this was really lacking from a male perspective. That a lot of guys aren't very comfortable talking about a topic like this because we're all brought up, macho and
Yeah.
solve everything on our own, right? Which is kind of ridiculous because if you're diabetic and you need insulin, you take insulin, right? And
Yeah.
it's not really any different with something like this. You've got something's a little bit off with your brain chemistry. It doesn't make it dangerous. It doesn't make it crazy. It just means you have something that you need to work on if you want to overcome and lead as we say in our group, a fuller and richer life. You get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Basically, I lost any one of a number of jobs, and finally, about 20 years ago, the light switch went on that I talked to my wife and I said, well, there's obviously something going on here because, I can't just sit and blame my employer because, you
Yeah.
know, not when it happens more than once. That's a trend, that's a pattern. So I got counseling and a medication, and I started working for a newsletter publishing company and a friend of mine. And the ironic thing, Joe, is I got help through an employee assistance program, also known as an EAP. It's a
Okay.
wonderful underutilized benefit that a lot of employers have. You can usually get like 5, 6 sessions free of charge. And that was kind of my start. And then in 2017, when we lost our dog, I had another pretty good relapse. I just couldn't get out of the grief I was experiencing. And a
Mhm.
friend of mine asked to join a Fresh Hope support group, and it's been fantastic. You're talking to like-minded people.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes somebody who's walked the walk to understand where you're coming from. I'll give you a quick example if you don't mind. I'll give her some buddies up about a month ago. Okay, I get up there and I forgot my bag. Oh boy, my bag's got my meds in it. Oh boy. Then I forgot part of my thing for my sleep app machine, and I'm just in a tizzy, and my, and anxiety's kicking in. And what can happen, not saying this is everybody, but what happens to me is I do what's called ruminate. I got this going over and over in my head. Some people will just move on. Okay, I forgot my bag. Well, I'll go into town, get a couple pairs of underwear, buy cheap shirts somewhere, and I'm fine and good to go. For whatever reason, I have a very difficult time doing that. It's going over and over in my head. I'm beating myself up. Why did I do that? How dumb are you, Mike? And I ended up leaving. Long story short, I ended up leaving the next morning because I wasn't having any fun. I couldn't. I couldn't snap out of it. But part of the reason I couldn't snap out of it is because I didn't have my meds with me that would have helped me get through that.
Well, yeah, you're thrown off right away. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you mentioned that you have anxiety and depression, and I know in the book you mentioned you have ADHD as well, correct?
That's what I was diagnosed with. Now, my collaborator on my book, Marina London, she seemed to think I might have been misdiagnosed, that I might have had what's called a receptive language disorder. The long story short is the attention, whatever the exact diagnosis, the problem is attention related. And some people think that you have to be hyperactive to have ADHD or ADD or something.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. You just have to have attention problems. And of course, when you're my age and you're growing up, and very little was understood about some of these things, the teachers always assume that you're not paying attention on purpose. you know,
Yeah.
they don't understand. You're just plain having problems paying attention. You see the daydreamer looking out the window. Well, sometimes sure it might be just goofing off, but sometimes they're doing that because they're bored or they can't keep their attention on the speaker, and there's so many more things they know now than when I was a kid.
In your book, what experiences do you discuss? Well, do you talk about in your book relating to your anxiety and depression? What details do you go into?
Well, I wrote it up. That's a very good question, Joe. Then that's why it was set up as a memoir, because the more I got to thinking about it, more I thought, well, some of these things are lifelong. So what I tried to do was I started out with some of the problems that I had when I was little, making friends. I'm not very coordinated. I wasn't very good at sports. So that hurt my self-esteem. So I start out talking about that and the problems I had with self-esteem, which impacts so many ways, right? And it impacts what people, I mean, especially at a young age where, you want to fit in and you're teased when you don't fit in. And so I talk about the teasing. I went away to school for a year to be a radio announcer, DJ. At least I thought that's what I wanted to do. And that didn't end up working out. So I now this was the hardest part of the book to write. I'd write about doing very, very little, if anything, for like roughly about 2 years. You hear the word slacker today? Well,
Yeah.
that was me. I was listening to music and I'm watching TV and I'm writing and I'm doing very, very little. And I'm putting on weight. I'm eating too much. But then the following year, a friend of mine helped me get into shape, started helping my mental health. Exercise has got a lot, really helps with mental health because the serotonins and the endorphins are released. I knew nothing about this at the time. This is all what I've learned since then, but all the time at the time, all I knew was, wow, I'm feeling a lot better. I'm losing weight, which is helping my self-esteem. And I bought a Camaro from a friend of mine, so now I got a cool car. So that was cool. And then I got laid off yet again. This was in the early 80s when the economy wasn't doing too well in a lot of areas. So I'm like, oh, great. What now? I finally got my life in order. What am I supposed to do now? But, there's a plan for each of us in life. And my plan was to go back to school. So I started attending the 2-year school in Manitowoc County. I ended up transferring to UW Oshkosh with a degree in journalism. Then I worked a few different jobs out of college. I was in a small town in another part of the state. I knew nobody there. I'm like 5 hours from home. Guess what happens? Depression starts sinking in. Well,
Yeah.
it's not the easiest thing to hold on to a job when you're depressed. So I ended up getting laid off. I was actually kind of relieved I did. I'm now like 31, I'm living at home. I'm 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 suicidal. I thought I was going to drown myself, but I thought, well, if I drown myself, that means I drown myself, and you know. But wouldn't you know it? It wasn't shortly after that things started getting better, and I was at a
Good.
party, and that's where I met my future wife. And then my next job was a wonderful job.
So you weren't thinking at all for your 20s and 30s that, oh, I might have ADHD, I might have depression or anxiety related issues.
No, not really. No, and just you just me got in the bad habit of blaming it on the job or blaming it on your boss. So if I just get a different boss or a different job, a different paper, things will get better. And they do for a while. But
Yeah.
what I'm not realizing at the time is that I'm bringing these problems with me from job to job. So it's just a matter of time before they resurface. And this is
Interesting.
what a lot of people don't understand is how much these things can impact everyday life. And that was a major goal for me in writing the book. I wanted to show people that, people say, "Oh, I'm depressed." Well, I've never been sad. You don't have to be sad
Yeah.
to be depressed. It goes more than that. But yeah, I mean, it really, really affected my daily life. And when you get laid off in 2000, and then you quit your next job in 2001. I'm giving you an idea of my age here now.
It's just,
And then and I got laid off after 9/11. I don't know if you even remember 9/11. Maybe you do.
yeah, I was born right after.
Yeah. Well, I remember it well because it had a big impact on the economy, and I was working as a grant writer. And so the funding for my job dried up because the economy got so completely uncertain that there was a real downtick in the economy for a while, and a lot of people, lost jobs and everything, and that was me yet again. So that's the point I was at where I started talking with my wife, and she's like, Mike, there's obviously something going on here. This has happened a number of times now. We got to get this figured out. But another thing, Joe, about my book is that the least thing I want to do is, sound like a pity pot or anything. It isn't about that at all. And in my group, we talk a lot about pushing through, sticking with it, learning strategies that help you stay on a good, positive course. Which is why the subtitle is a personal journey into mental wellness. Mental wellness is just like physical wellness.
Yeah.
It takes a while, but it certainly is a lot better than the alternative. What can happen, like unfortunately with my friend who took his life some years ago. He was having a lot of problems, and he had a lot of problems in the working world too, losing jobs. And you start finding out there's kind of a common thread in some of these things. I don't want to overgeneralize because things are different. Not everybody's things are lifelong. Some people have just like a full blown episode of some sort, and they get through that and they're okay. It's all a little bit different, but I have run into some other people who've had some difficulties with jobs, who have had some mental, and it makes sense if you think about it. I mean, a job isn't, or school, a job, that's not always the easiest thing when everything is going hunky dory. So you've
Yeah.
got some issues on top of that, and it just makes it harder. Not impossible, but it makes it harder. You feel like you got to work twice as hard as the other people around you to overcome.
So you mentioned a few times about getting laid off. Do you think that your mental health contributed to getting laid off, or getting laid off contributed to your mental wellness getting worse?
Both. Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say both. The fact that it never went away meant that it was going to resurface again at some point. The problems paying attention that I had when I was young, I still had some of those things, paying attention. You have problems fitting in because when you have depression, you don't, socializing is kind of an effort. I mean, I wouldn't remotely be able to think about doing anything like this, talking with you today. I'd rather go crawl in a shell.
Yeah, I appreciate
But
you coming on. That takes a
mhm,
lot of guts to talk about this and have a book about this. It's very cool to see, and it's really brave of you. And you were saying earlier that not enough men talk about their experience, and you're right for sure. It's like it's not, oh, you gotta bury your feelings or whatnot. Oh, you can't show your feelings because that's not a manly thing to do. So, but I would argue it's more manly to admit that, hey, I am going through something and I am going to try to educate myself about it and learn how to deal with the hand I'm dealt. So I
mhm.
really appreciate you being so open.
Yeah, yeah, it takes a while to realize that in life. And even when I went on medication, I still didn't really see the need for therapy at the time. I still wasn't going through that part of it. I know of somebody else who's suffered from depression. He went the opposite tack. He got therapy in the beginning, but it took him years for somebody to convince him you need more than that. You need to be medication. So we all have on our own little journey to a certain degree. There's similarities. There's things that aren't quite so similar. But yeah, I just came to the view, Joe. I wanted to have a fuller and richer life, and I just knew something was missing. There's a spiritual element to this too, and that played a great deal of help. I memorized some scripture passages that helped me through some of my darkest days, that gave me the courage to keep going, knowing that scripture says that there is a good plan for me. And if you've got something going on, you can self medicate, with alcohol or booze or drugs if you want, but the problem's only going to resurface again. At some point, you have to be willing to come to grips with it. And if you don't get better.
So being in a small town, were you in a small town most of your life?
Yes. Hmm. Yeah.
So being in a small communities, especially in Wisconsin, where the winters here are pretty brutal compared to the rest of the country, how did you get the mental wellness and help that you needed with maybe less resources around you, being in a small community? And it's a safe assumption to say there can be more things to get you stressed out or to get you more depressed just because, winter will just not stop. There's not as many activities to do, or there's less people to be around.
Well, you learn coping strategies. I belong to the fitness center in town here. I make it a point of being there. I mean, I go for a walk with my dog as much as I can in the winter, but I know I've got to get over there and do that too. That'll release endorphins or whatever, and it'll help. Sometimes I work with my doctor, and he'll up my medication a little bit for the winter months. That's not totally unheard of. And I didn't need it this last year, which was wonderful. But I also have one of these white lights that you can plug in for like about an hour or so in the morning, and it helps make up for the fact that you're not getting sunlight the way you normally would
Oh,
during other
okay.
times of the year. So there's a number of people who do that, and that helps. And then later on this fall here, I'll also start taking vitamin D, because our body is not producing vitamin D during the winter months, and it starts again in mid-spring. So you learn how to cope. You learn how to cope, or you sit in your house and sulk and feel bad, and you start feeling sorry for yourself, and it's just a road that leads nowhere. So that's where being in a support group helps too, because we'll talk very openly about anything like this, and somebody will have an idea that you might not have thought about, or you might have an idea that they might not have thought about. Oh, yeah, I didn't know that, because you're just speaking to completely like-minded people. So, but a group setting doesn't work for everybody, for sure,
Yeah.
because like you say, it isn't the easiest to talk about these things. And if that's the case for you and you're watching this, seek out a therapist on your own, more of a one-on-one thing. I have a friend of mine who he'd never join a group with a bunch of other people. He's rather introverted, and that's fine. But he sees a therapist. I mean, it's all good. It's whatever works for you to feel better.
If you wanted to be in a group setting, what would be the best way to find a group?
Well, like I said, I'm big on this Fresh Hope group that I belong to for about 6 years. They're nationwide. It's even in other countries. Um, freshhope.us, and you can find out whether there's other groups in this day and age. Any one of a number of them are online. Our
Yeah.
particular group meets in person, but some of them don't. But there's other organizations and groups too. Mental Health America, NAMI,
Mhm.
NAMI, and they've been around a while, and they have support groups, a lot of local chapters and
Yeah.
things. I know Point has got a chapter, I believe, Appleton, a lot of bigger communities, even semi-bigger communities will have one.
So, going back to your book a little bit here, you are not the only author of the Climbing Out of Darkness, a personal journey into mental wellness. You worked with Marina London, and can you tell me more about her and
Yeah,
her role in this
yeah.
story?
I worked on Marina for a number of years on a quarterly magazine that I edited for the Employee Assistance Professionals Association. And she sharp as a tack, and she, good editor, good writer. She helped me edit and the book, and some areas where I started rambling on a little bit in some certain areas. She helped me rein that in and say, no, that's too much about that, Mike. You're getting away from the mental health part of it a little too much. But where she was of the biggest help was that she's a trained mental health professional. She knew a lot of this stuff backwards and forwards. And at the end of each chapter, there's a little section Q&A with a clinician, and I bring up a question, and she addresses it. And it's usually kind of related as expounding on something that I brought up in the book. Quick example here. I talk a lot in the book too, Joe, about having the right fit for yourself academically, work wise, and whatever, and how some of these were a lot better for me than others. In hindsight, now I realize how much a better fit a weekly newspaper was for me than a daily newspaper. Because at a weekly newspaper, my anxiety didn't kick in that much because you only had a deadline once a week instead of every day. In the newspaper business, that they push you to be at a daily, but like Marina said, and high stress environment, that's not for everybody. In fact, something that just really jumped out at me is she says, when I was working at a corporate mental health program, many of the employees who came in because they were unhappy at work. 9 times out of 10, get this, 9 times out of 10, their unhappiness was due to a very poor fit between the employee's personality and the work environment. I found myself repeatedly recommending those employees look for a more suitable position.
Wow.
I mean, there's a lot of us that are in the wrong job, and no job is perfect by any
Yeah.
means. The perfect job doesn't exist, but there are some jobs that are a much better fit for us than others. Again, it goes back to how these things affect your your everyday life, or not for everybody, but
Yeah.
but for a lot of us, they do.
I do want to also ask, do you think there is a lot of awareness of mental health and suicide awareness in our local communities and small towns in central Wisconsin, or do you think more needs to be done?
I think more needs to be done. I think it's getting there. It's in the news and the media a lot more than it used to be. You know, you're it's on this podcast, which is wonderful, much appreciated. But I think more needs to be done. And I'll go back to that example I had of, when I was up north, and my friends, they just had no idea why I was so upset. Why I just couldn't put this past me. And
Yeah.
I'm driving home the next day. It's like, but what's wrong here? Because I mean, and this isn't to be rough on them or anything. It's the lack of understanding, right? From their perspective, boom, you move on and fine and dandy. Why is Mike struggling with this? You have a hard time understanding it. there's still a ways to go to drive, um, increase the awareness of just how these things affect everyday life. And it's true in the secular world, and it's I hate to say it, but there's some truth to it in the church world too. I was in a Bible study at one time. It was pretty common to go around the group, and pray for somebody's concern, operation coming up or somebody sick, whatever. Bring up something mentally that you're depressed. All of a sudden, quiet, crickets. You hear crickets chirping in the room, and they want to be helpful. They're wonderful people, but they don't have that vantage point where they understand why you're struggling.
So,
And
so what should be done in small towns to help gain more awareness? What should be done? Should there be more events? Just more people talking about it openly? Because I do feel like there's been a good amount of progress. Because I know even in the last 5, 10 years, just uh, not necessarily like a small town or area, but just
mhm,
in the country, it seems like there
mhm,
is a lot more openness to talk about mental health. I was probably a lot more aware of it in high school than you were in high school
I'm
about
I'm sure you
mental
were.
health.
hmm Yeah, that's a good point, Joe. Yes, there has slowly but surely been more and more awareness. Yeah, it was terrible when I was young. I wouldn't wish anybody on that. If you saw somebody on TV back then who had a mental health issue, they were usually either crazy or dangerous or both. They're in a rubber room. It was pretty bad at one time. Yes, it's slowly gotten better, and I think the key is just more people, you know, uh, male or female, men or women, talking about it and explaining to people that, like Marina said in my book, if you suffer from migraines, you need to take some kind of a strong headache pill, right?
Yeah.
You're a diabetic, you need to take insulin. It's not different. You're just taking something for what you have. But if you do have something a little remiss with your brain chemistry, that's only going to get you so far. You, Most of us need both. We need medication and we need therapy and we need to talk about it. Again, I'm overgeneralizing a little bit. What works for one person might not work for someone else, but generally speaking, that's often the case. And I would say keep going the way we're going, doing what we can to raise awareness.
Part of it too, I know in order to even get therapy, there's a lack of therapists currently. I know the
Mhm.
wait lists are months long. What advice would you give someone if they can't find a therapist right away? Should they try to find a support group, or should they talk with a trusted family member or friend about this?
Yeah, I think a family member is always a good place to start. I mentioned the EAP, Employee Assistance Program, because a lot of employers have one, and it's a benefit that a lot of people are not aware of. And like I say, there's a limited number of sessions, so it might not be super helpful long term for somebody, but it gets the ball rolling. Because yeah, you're absolutely right about the shortage, and insurance can get to be a factor too, because some of these therapists aren't cheap either.
Yeah.
Uh,
You can
okay,
find Climbing Out of Darkness, a personal journey into mental wellness on Amazon. And you can also find your other books on Amazon as well, your two
right.
Packer books. Do you have any future books you're working on right now?
I
Anything
don't
on the
have
go?
anything I'm working on right now, Joel. It's a good question. I think writing 3 books in the span of 4 years kind of fried me out a little bit to where I haven't been doing anywhere near as much writing lately. I've been working more on promoting what I do have right now. The next book, I'm really not sure yet. To be terribly honest, it might be another mental health book of some sort. All kind of depends where God leads me, I think. And whatever, however it all shakes out, it's all good.
Sounds good. Thank you again for being on PodPaca today. Everyone make sure to check out Mike's book on Amazon, Climbing Out of Darkness, A Personal Journey into Mental Wellness. Thank you again for being on today. It was awesome to have you on. You are our first Iola resident to be on PodPaca, so way to represent Iola, and we hope to have more Iola residents on as well. So
Yeah,
thank
great.
you for being on.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on today, Joe. Greatly appreciate the time and the opportunity to speak about an important topic.